Today I'm joined by Nic Milani for a very vulnerable, honest, and emotional conversation. Today we talk about toxic independence, vulnerability, toxic masculinity, a lot of these things that in a way our society is championing. How hard can you work? How much time can you put in? How much sacrifice can you give for the job that you have, for the thing that you're working towards? And are you actually gaining something by all this effort you're putting forth, or are you sacrificing everything? Very beautiful conversation. I'm really honored to have Nic here and to have him be as open as he is to share his journey and to share his experiences. Hope you get something out of the conversation. We'll see you on the other side. Journey of the Modern Soul is a listener-supported podcast. Ways that you can support me in this show that would make me very happy are by sharing an episode with somebody that you think it would impact, by liking or subscribing to the show on whichever platform that you're listening on, or by making a financial contribution. Any donations, if you're called to it, can be made to my Venmo account at Adam-Real, ADAM-RIEHL. Links will be in the show notes. Thank you. No matter how much we prepare, the holidays tend to stress us out. So this year, take a moment to reset and recenter with a grounding retreat in Costa Rica. Join Jeff Hawkins, Steve Wimmer, Cameron Nagashima, and myself, Adam Real, for a one-week immersive yoga retreat at Blue Osa Resort, backed up to miles of pristine beach. Every day you'll have an option to experience yoga, meditation, relaxation, self-discovery, adventures, or your own personal free time. This is a time to build your peaceful practices before you need them. Take this time for yourself. Visit GarudaWellness.com for details. We have pricing options available, and if you pay in full by July 1st, you receive a 20% discount. Through the experiences offered, there's a lot of different ways to build your practice and approach this retreat. Take time to create space for yourself so you can hold space for others. Reset and recenter. Visit GarudaWellness.com for more information. That's Garuda, Garuda, Wellness, WELLNESS.com. GarudaWellness.com. And now an uninterrupted episode with Nic Milani. All right, welcome back to our show. Today I'm joined by a beautiful human being that I've yogaed next to, I've cried with, I've camped with. We've our kids have played together. We've done all the things. Love you to death. Mr. Nic Milani's here. And it's funny because I just asked Nic, what do you? How do you want me to introduce you? And, you want me to talk about your accolades? We're going to talk a lot about a specific subject today. But you said something very interesting that we focus so much on what do you do? Hi, my name's Nic. What do you do? Yeah. What do you do in the world? It's like, why do we ask that question? And you said something really interesting, and it's like, that's where it all starts, right? It's like, hi, different human than me. My name is Adam. What do you do? What kind of question is that? I hate that question so much because it's like, what do I do for work? What do I do for life? What do I do? Does one negate the other? Does one fill the other? Right? But there's another question that's been haunting me that I think supersedes that question. What do you do? And I think it leads to that question. How many kids do you have in your life outside of your own personal kids, right? Kids that you just see in life, in the world, like anywhere, from toddler understanding words to in high school or something, right?
Me?
Yeah.
Look, I'm one of those Uber connectors.
Right.
For those of you listening, I am one of those people that has millions of relationships all over the world and such depth and awkwardness and craziness. So I can't even answer that question. It's so big. It's bazillions.
So tons of people.
Tons of interactions, and I consider myself a person of observing humans. Right? Okay. Hit me with it.
So the question that I hear so much, and I've been victim of it, and I still ask ask this question.
We all do the things we're programmed to do.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh, yeah.
Why the fuck are we asking toddlers?
What's your 5-year goal?
Little kids, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a hygienist like mommy? Do you want to be a teacher like who effing cares? Why are we planting this seed of your self-worth is based off of the job that you do at such a young age? Right?
Well, unfortunately, it's a USA issue.
Yeah, right.
It's nowhere else in the world. Literally, it's a USA issue.
Yeah.
And that's what we've uncovered in our podcasts and our conversations is that and it's a man problem. It's by and large. Now, unfortunately, when we, throw out big words like toxic masculinity, what we have to realize is that we're all victims of that, men and women.
Right.
And one of the most horrific things I've seen is how we've used corporate America to drive these kinds of policies and behaviors, and it's influencing women who used to be empathetic and kind and be a counterbalance to some of the stupidity. Unfortunately, they're just being indoctrinated into the same behaviors. And so, I love that, my wife has a beautiful career, and she is a much more talented person in that sense of achievement and specialization and all these things. And I love expertise and mastery.
Yeah.
But I also need to be very careful that we don't do those things as our sense of self. Right. And what is I fell trapped to that.
Yeah. Well, I think we all have such an easy ability to fall trapped to that.
No. I gave my life over to the corporate world.
Okay.
I gave my sense of self to corporations. And it's okay. Yeah. I can explain why I got there. And for everybody that will listen, you can always look back at the math and go, oh shit, it all added up.
Yeah.
But if you escape traumas, if you spend a lot of part of your life involved in capital T traumas, then when somebody actually gives you affirmation and support and says, hey, good boy, here's some money and a slap on the butt and just keep working, keep driving. Well, and all of a sudden, does that become hustle culture? Which we brag and celebrate, and all of a sudden we look around these organizations and these corporations and the people that rise to the top, by and large, are survivors of trauma because they're willing to sacrifice whatever it takes because they've already survived the trauma.
That's okay. So let's just dial into that real quick because so one of the things, many of the things we'll talk about today is loneliness, toxic independence, male loneliness, corporatocracy, things like that. But that what you just said really hits home because we don't realize how much we're selling ourselves to fill somebody else's goals, right? How much we're abandoning our own lives to help somebody else make dollars. How much we're compromising our own personal morals.
Oh, Adam, we're just going to compartmentalize it. We're going to leave work at work and take home. It's all going to be fine.
Yep, totally.
We've been told that the means justify the end. As long as I get my Tahiti trip in every year, we're good, right, bro? Meanwhile, we're destroying the fucking fabrics of our society.
Yep, totally.
And here's the one thing that folks won't realize about me is I took an oath to this country. I served in the military at one point to try to escape some of that shit, to try to elevate my life. And it was beautiful. I loved my time in the military. But I took an oath to protect and serve the country. And we're not serving each other as a community. And that's what the country's meant to be. Yeah. One big community of humans that are here serving each other. And we're in service to each other to better outcomes. And all I see is infighting and bullshit. Yeah. And it's all distraction.
It is. And we're getting so used to stepping on people to make our lives seemingly better, to betterment our families, things like that. For whatever reason you want to put on top
KPIs are the reason.
KPIs. All those acronyms, man. All those goddamn acronyms. And we got to, it's to a point to where, it doesn't make any sense anymore. It doesn't. I don't think it ever made sense, but there was a way we could hide it to have it make sense, capitalism and all this stuff. But it's to a point now where, if you even take things like, just what's going on with racism in the world, right? Or in the West. And where there's the idea that, especially cis white males have it made. They've got it fucking made in this world, right? Yeah. But there's also a lot of those people that quote unquote have it made that are still living underneath a poverty line or living underneath, they're not seeing the benefits that could be given to them, right? And so I think that also creates another story of what do you mean I'm benefiting? Get fucked. I'm poor as shit too. Well, but not seeing the the spectrum because of this stories that we've been kind of funneled into, right? And so I think it takes so much of you getting out of your own personal experience and story to see, maybe where you fall in trap, so that you can be you can expand it a little bit more, so that you can hold space for other people. But it's if you don't realize you're a part of it, then there's never going to be a way that you can impact it. Right, because we can't be forced to show that I'm being toxic. I'm leaning into the fact that I'm loneliness. All that stuff.
All of us, and then that's the community. Yeah. But we've gotten all too good at drawing lines and dividing and trying to chop things up. And there's a different conversation. I'm sure we can all just talk about social media real quick and understand how that happens. And I'm sure your listeners are aware of that. But coming back to this idea, big topics, right? Around I'm a 45-year-old Caucasian male. Now, could I claim Native American because I have Cherokee in my blood? I probably could, right? That's something that's in that conversation. Do I see myself as a white middle-aged male? Actually, I don't. Right. When I talk to my psychiatrist in private and I talk about my body image things, I don't look at the world through the way that others see me. Now, when I show up to a space, though, what I know is this, is that we're all judging the shit out of each other these days because we've been programmed to through social media. And so what happens is we're all showing up, and whether we know it or not, we're going back to this internal programming, and it's all sides towards everyone, and none of it's based on common understanding, and actually just taking a second to say, how are you? Who are you? What brings you to this point? And can I share a really interesting story that came from basic training? Actually, not basic training. When you go through the military, you go through basic training, which you meet a lot of interesting humans, but everyone by design is in a somatic state of stress. They are trying to put you triggered constantly and make it so that you can learn how to maintain yourself and that overcome that. It's a superpower when you get done with it, by the way. It's really cool. You learn how to march with other humans. You learn how to really work together on stuff, independent of all these things. Then you go to technical training. You start to spend like a few months together with folks. And now I was an alternative student. I'd been to school for a few years, but I was, because of the way that the system works, I was in a specific job field, and I was enlisted. And so I was around, a lot of folks that just come out of high school. And in the 3 months I spent in Wichita Falls, Texas, I got to know a lot of people down there. And one person in particular, Dobbs, he'd grown up on the south side of Chicago. And he told me at the end of our time together that I was the first white person he'd ever had a conversation with.
Wow.
And I was like, holy shit. Like, I grew up in Iowa, not too far from Chicago, right? Like, now we didn't have a lot of African Americans in Iowa. Just the population isn't that demographic.
Yeah.
Okay. That can be objectively true. I'm sitting here talking to this young man, and he's saying to me, Nick, I grew up in a city, Chicago, and I never had a white person speak to me before. And then he says to me this, I didn't know you all had problems.
Oh, wow.
Then he says, I'd never met somebody that was white that had survived the kind of shit I've survived. Because point of us being here is I'm not afraid to talk about it.
Right.
And I made a decision when I was 16 that I would never not talk about it again.
Right.
And so in a lot of ways, I still see the world through those eyes. Yet here I am, this man that's walking around with these things and these children, and it's projecting this totally different thing in this new world. And it is all by design isolated, and I just think we have to overcome it through basic conversation.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's so a little bit about you first before we move on. So you do many, many things. You've been in corporations. You've held many acronym positions. You've developed companies. I used to call them the acronym army.
I love it, by the way. It's great, man. It's perfect. Lots of acronym positions. Yes, I have all the acronyms.
Yeah, alphabets after my name for days, right? But and with that, there's a lot of like you said, attaboys. There's a lot of accolades. There's a lot of like, God, you're doing great. And when it's great, it's great. But like that expectation is bonkers, right? And so on top of all the corporate stuff that you've been and you're still a part of, I think you're trying to find a more holistic way to move in towards these groups again. But most recently, you've been hosting a podcast with a friend of yours, Authentic Connections, which I love the concept of, where your friend Jeff, I believe, right?
Yeah, he's actually a former colleague. We're not friends.
Awesome. Okay.
We've become friends.
Okay.
But we survived a really toxic, abusive environment together.
Right on. But I love how you guys, the format where Jeff will have a topic that you don't know, and then just like basically, hey, Nick, random conversation. Here we go.
Yeah.
I love that. But the thing that there's so much that you do that I love.
Yep.
But the GoFundMe that you just dropped for Suicide Awareness Month is such a call to action. And I think you were talking about that just like 2 weeks ago, and it was like almost immediate after you.
No, you mentioned it actually. We practice yoga. Adam, for those of you listening, is such an amazing human. One of his many gifts is just as an instructor. It's incredible to be in your class.
Thank you.
And what's incredible about Adam is that his presence. When you see him, when you meet him, he's there with you in that moment, just like we are now. And we can go distance in time and. Without that, and when we do, it's great. And we hadn't seen each other in a while, and I mentioned Authentic Connections, and you intuitively mentioned Suicide Awareness is September, and I thought to myself, I'm a dumbass. Here I am talking about these big boy topics, trying to role model, and it's been a passion project put in the world. I didn't even know September was Suicide Awareness. And I got home and I've taken this new lean agile life approach, which is I look at the world in 2-week sprints. And I don't think about the future beyond it, and I don't think the past, other than unless I'm trying to learn from my past sprint what I could do differently.
Okay.
And I just try to get heads down and the most important thing in my life with my hour that I can do to save lives. And that felt like the most important thing, and you were a catalyst to it. And we had this catalog of work, so it was like, now I just need to go do the work. And I think one of the things that's core to change, and one of the things that my journey has been about, is that sometimes we get really afraid of the work because it's scary and it's new and we haven't done it before. And without fail, when we just pick up the shovel, it seems to get done pretty quick.
Right. Yeah. You just got to get past, and it is a process, and it's not easy by any means.
It's hard. It's so hard.
But, if you think about some of the shit that you actually do on a regular basis that you can justify, this is not that damn hard.
No.
Right? It's looking at it in a different way, being a little vulnerable, which is we're kind of taught not to be, especially as men, we're taught not to be vulnerable. We hold on to it. And what's funny? It's because so how much it's changed now.
Yeah.
To where we're having this conversation, right? We're having dialogue about men's feelings, about not wanting to be the iron fist, about the toxic masculinity, about wanting to cry, about potential suicide awareness, all this shit. But it's still fucking hard to actually do it, right? Yeah. Even though the door is open, that doesn't mean everybody's walking through that door.
No.
Right? Like something is just simple for me the other day, a couple weeks ago, we decided to take in a puppy. My daughter brought home a puppy, and she was cute. She fit in with my other 2 dogs.
Puppies, like babies, are meant to be cute.
Fantastic. Right, exactly. They need to be, exactly. Because if not, it's like, I'm not taking care of that little shit machine, right? So dog comes in, packs up with our other 2 dogs. It's great, right? We have a 14-year-old American Eskimo, and my housemate has a 2-year-old poodle mix of sorts, right? This little 5-month-old packed up real quick. Everybody's hanging out. They're fighting. They're having a good time, all that shit, right? So a couple days into it, my dog, the American Eskimo, 14 years old, blows out her knee, right? Her version of an ACL, CCL. And needs a lot of attention. And then my housemate's allergies start kicking in. Both of our current dogs are hypoallergenic. The new dog is not. So there's all these circumstances that started to pop up to where it's like, we can force this to work, but it'd be better if there was another situation.
Yeah.
And there was an opportunity that made sense. Beautiful home. Everything's great. So we decided to rehome this puppy. So I woke up on Sunday and we made the decision. The person was going to come over and get the dog. And I was a fucking wreck. I was an emotional wreck. I was just beside myself. And it wasn't all just the dog leaving. There was a lot of stuff that was coming up that, abandonment. I'm not ready to do this. I'm not enough. How could I fail?
Yeah. That internal talk, by the way, everybody listening, all day long, 100%. Every day, all day long.
Yep.
If you've survived stuff, you will have this.
Yep. And it was so loud.
It's what you do with it.
And it's like I meditated.
Can I tell you my favorite framework, by the way, that I've learned?
Yeah.
So I reached out to this brilliant man in my life that is a Persian, just fascinating story. Because I love when people also are coming from outside of this country and their perspective, because it really makes some of our programming feel and look silly.
Yeah, totally.
And if we can't see ourselves being silly, then how are we ever going to grow?
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to laugh at ourselves.
Definitely.
We need to be able to look back at the past mistakes and not judge ourselves and want to cancel ourselves, but celebrate that we tried, that we failed, and that we were going to improve.
Yeah. And that
the only thing that we should be shameful about is that we haven't changed.
Yeah.
And that's a different cycle, and we'll unpackage that cycle a different part. But you think about this framework that he teaches me. So I'm having the conversation. I said, Karush, I keep feeling this welling of emotion in my body, and I'm not. The thing that's really screwing with me now is I'm to a point in this process that I know all the things that happen. I've written them down, and they're still ruling me every single day.
Right.
And I just wish I could self-actualize these feelings.
Yeah.
And it was great, because this is why we have friends and we have these conversations. He goes, Nick, there's this great framework I learned. They use it in Al-Anon, which he was involved in. And it's it's called the adult chair. The gal's name is Michelle. I joke because I'm bad with names, Chafalant, and you can add a link in there or whatever. But the first 4 episodes are worth a listen, because what she breaks down is this simple concept. We have 3 chairs in our life. The adult chair, the one we're both sitting in right now, Adam, it's the only chair that's present.
Right.
When we feel that emotional swell, when you feel that moment in that Saturday morning, that's the adolescent chair. The adolescent is trying to protect the child. The only present chair is the adult. So what we simply do is acknowledge the emotions and just try to figure out, what was the adolescent? What are we trying to protect? And when we see what we're trying to protect, we usually uncover what it's related to trauma-wise.
Right.
And so much of that is, as Bree, my wife, you've met Bree and spent time with her. She's a lovely, amazing, intuitive human, so smart. One time she said to me, she's like, your internal monologue is your mother's voice when you were a child. And I was like, oh, shit. Because that's not always good.
Yeah. Yep.
And also, not everybody's always raised by somebody. Sometimes we're raised by wolves.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have a lot of people in our lives, and a lot of people are sharing lots of little things and trying to make us better, and what they're doing is just making us them.
Yeah.
So we find ourselves at some point in our lives where all of a sudden we're this like mosaic of all these other things that people have told us we are. And we got to go through this really, really challenging process of like deciding which parts of the mosaic we want to keep and which ones we don't.
Yeah.
And all I know is when I feel that swell of emotions now, I try to really pause, and I don't always get it. Because that swell of emotions comes sometimes, and that's that somatic system triggering me to just respond.
Right.
And I got some really good responses that I can do with people. And it's usually what I notice the pattern is, independent of how, if I'm coming across as being quote unquote mean, because it's a spectrum of intensity.
Right.
So, and when we get aggressive or we're trying to project or push, there's a spectrum of how much energy we push out there. And I've been working on my throat chakra a ton, all centered in this space.
Right.
Because I've been using my throat chakra, speaking publicly on the behalf of companies, doing all this training. Project. Right. Projection is, 80% truth, 20% lies in the corporate world. And sometimes it's inverted. And, you're getting the paycheck and that's your job and that's what you're good at. So dance monkey and get up on stage. And you get used to doing that. And what you don't realize is that behavior starts to come into your other sides. And, even if it's a minor emotion and I do control the way I react to it, it's important to start to understand, like, if you can catch the minor ones, it gives you hope of catching the big ones.
Right. Yeah. And I think that lends so much.
And the puppy's a silly example.
Well,
that's
it is,
why
but it isn't.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
If we lean into the small example,
right.
If we lean into the first time I went to the yoga studio, I had a severe breakdown before I went. I've never had an anxiety breakdown in my life. Why yoga? Because I didn't want to go do the new thing because my conscience was trying to stop me. Yeah. And that's okay.
Yep.
It's, you're in that space. It's irrational from the outside. It's a puppy, dude. Everyone's sick. Move on. But pause, actually in the space. Do not move on. Work through it and say, what's it feel like? We talked about this before.
Right.
We talked about this before.
Yeah. And that's the trap that I fell in on that day was, it's like, you're fine. I kept saying, you're fine. You're fine. Not. And I kept trying to like swallow down the tears. And even though, and this is the funny thing, it's like,
because we've been taught, be tough. Be strong for people, be all these things too. I bet there was a lot of different processing going through there.
There's that. But the stronger voice was, you coach people on letting go. You tell people it's okay. Let the fucking thing go. Cry, be ugly, snot, blubber, right? And it's like I just kept fucking fighting it back, swallowing it down, and it was I finally did let it go. And it felt so good. And I knew it would. Because every time that I finally let myself cry, that's a hard thing for me, is letting myself cry. It always feels better afterwards. And not only the emotional release, which is beautiful because we got to let that shit go. We can't hold on to it. But there's research groups like Johns Hopkins right now that's doing research on the chemical effect of the hormones released in the tears you cry help solve the problem of why you started crying in the first place. Because all of our tears look different between grief and sadness and happiness and yada yada. But so under a microscope, they all look different. But they're also finding hormones are released in different ways through your tears depending on what makes you cry. So if you take that tear, this is the hypothesis they're working with, if you take the tears from your eyes onto your fingers and put them in your mouth, there's the hormones released in those tears that cure the reason why you started crying in the first place. That doesn't mean you're skirting the issue, but it's like your body releasing these hormones to say, hey, we're all good.
It's ready to process.
Let's hug each other inside,
Well, and if you don't believe it, then let's talk about the other side of people that are existing in deep levels of stress their whole lives. And if you're listening to this stuff and you're struggling with that release, the thing that I had to come to and realize in my own life and my own journey was just like, It's the somatic system, and it's so misunderstood. And I feel like an idiot even speaking about it in your presence. And, and we have people in our life like Marianne who has like committed her life to this space.
Yeah.
And I'm so blessed to be in that journey. And isn't it fitting that we find ourselves in this journey?
Nothing's an accident.
Nothing's an accident. Yeah. Celestine Prophecy, for those of you who've never read it. Have you read Celestine Prophecy? Oh, yeah. Yeah. For those of you who never listen to Celestine Prophecy, we have plenty of time to go on tangents.
Do it.
Okay.
Do it.
I was at the yoga studio last week, and one of the new trainees, I'll leave names out of this better. It's always helpful. I shouldn't use names. One of the new trainees came up to me after a Wednesday embodied flow with Marianne. She says, hey, I've seen you around here. What's your name? I introduce myself. She's, I think I met you a few years ago. I love this, by the way.
Yeah.
Some people act weird. I lean forward. My whole life is predicated on this, by the way. I have a million examples of this.
Yeah.
It's affirmation we're on the right path. Anybody says that to you, you have a sense that you should talk to them, talk to them. And that'll be the theme, by the way.
Yeah.
At the end of this, the only thing I'll say to the listeners is if you want to save somebody's life, trust your fucking intuition. If somebody looks at you and they need your help and they're not saying it, but you're feeling it, talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
Just talk to them.
Yeah.
Don't ask them what they do. Just talk to them. What brings you to this point in life? Happy Thursday. Happy Friday. Doesn't matter what day it is.
Yeah.
You just be there. Be present. Now, where was my tangent again?
Well, while you're thinking about that, I'm going to just tangent on that because there's a book that I read recently, and it's a breakdown of the Harvard Happiness Study.
Oh.
There's a Harvard Happiness Study that's been going on since the 30s, right? And one of the things like they started as they're interviewing these people is why are you happy? How's your relationships? All this stuff. Some of the groups they would give little tasks to, right? So hey, okay, so over the next week, let's say you take the public bus to work every day, right? Normally you're on there, you read your paper, you're on your phone, whatever it is, right? But you're involved in yourself. You're not involved in the community. So challenge to you: say hi to your neighbor. Start a conversation every single day on the bus. Say hi to your neighbor. What's going on? How are you today? And then report back. And I think it was 90% of the people that decided that were tasked to talk to a stranger had a much better day that day.
Yeah,
They're social butterfly. They were connected. They felt like they were loved. They had conversations. All this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So there is something that is like when we can connect outside of our own personal selves. Right? We have so much going on inside of us.
But that's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
And that's why she said to me, we met a couple years ago.
Okay.
She described to me the place. I've only been there for 2 days in my entire life.
Okay.
I was there with young children, which means we weren't out in public very much. Then all of a sudden she describes the spot. And I go, holy crap. There's a bar over on one side over here, and there was an outdoor courtyard, and we walked in with the kids, and we grabbed some beers and some tacos. Was that a Mexican? And the smile on her face was like, I'm the one that sold you the food that night.
Oh, shit.
One of your students.
All right.
One of your students. And I just had this moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, I know the amazing humans I was with. I love those humans that I was with. And that intersection happens. And the idea of these big arcs of life, eons, and the space we find, like, I just think it's such an affirmation that when that happens, because I've struggled with my move out here. It's driven me into deep, deep loneliness and isolation. And it was really the impetus for the podcast was for me to own the space and talk about being lonely openly amongst the people I was around. And then all of a sudden to notice that, like, I was talking to people about it, but they weren't talking back. Yet I was observing that people were all very lonely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think, one of the problems that we have is that we all feel it, but not many of us can admit to it. And even if we admit to it, it's like, well, what are we going to do about it? You know, and I think that's the other hard part.
Yeah, you're just bitching about that, by the way. If you talk about being lonely, everybody's just complaining. You're like, right. I lack the words. And by the way, it's the reason why I think, Adam, that feels that way for us is because we lack the words.
Yeah.
Because who in my life taught me a framework around loneliness and growth mindset? Nobody.
Yeah.
You know, it's the principle of my entire business is that we've stripped growth mindset out of corporate identity. And now I'm going to go back and replace it. And I'm going to fix these companies one at a time. Yeah. So nobody ever gets abused again. Because they are sources of abusement for lots of people.
There, you know, after being out of corporates for so long and
I said
looking,
abusement, by the way. That's like an amusement ride of abuse. What an fitting, intuitive
actually, I like that.
abusement.
Abusement.
Man, I love to go to work for my abusement. my 401k after that abusement session, by the way. Woo!
Oh my God, abusement. Well, and it's like, holding positions of power in your job, right? Or positions of authority.
Yeah. Yep.
You start to feel like it's all on me, right? Like I got to do this. And there's that, we talked about toxic loneliness that happened earlier, but like male loneliness, things like that.
Yeah.
But there's a level of that reaches those positions of power in companies as well. And it's like, well, I've got to be the one to make the tough decision, or I've got to enact what the board has said. So a lot of times, like, we'll put away our own personal morals, we said this earlier, for the betterment of the company, but then that drives into that loneliness even more, because it's like, even though this is the company's decision that I'm making for the company, I'm the one saying it. I'm the one that has to deliver it to my staff members. That whole idea, thankfully, caused me to quit a fucking job. I worked at a company that was around before I was born. That there were people that worked there that were older than me, right?
Yeah.
That had been their life, right?
Yeah.
And I was running their restaurant program. And this place was a staple in the community. The staff members that worked there to the guests that came in, right? Families were raised there. And they decided to get bought out by a big company. And they came to the upper management at the time, me and the restaurant, and then the brewery managers and all this stuff, and said, hey, this is what's going to happen. Basically, you need to lie to your staff and tell them everything's good. We're all good. Put on a smile. Put on a face. Everything's good. And I'm like, get fucked.
By the way, they probably offered you money to do that.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Okay, so hold on. Let's unpackage the way the fuckery happens.
Yeah.
First off, you sign an NDA. So what they'll do is when they come in and do a transaction, they're going to sign an NDA with key people in the background. And then they're going to go to those key people and say, hey, we got something that nobody else can know about because we need to protect them. And that, by the way, that is true. That is the empathetic thing to do. If you're going to move your company through change, protect your people from that change. But at some point, we also have to figure out, like, where are we moving this to and what's the outcome? And, like, how do we want to be as people and handle it?
Right.
And there's a right way and a wrong way to all this stuff. Now, I don't think it's black and white. I think it's actually really squishy.
Yeah.
And the right path for each organization is different, but it's been stripped out. And what happens is the people that do the linchpin work get paid to do it. But do you know the number of times? So there's this classic story of a big company that is just seen as a darling that I may or may not have used to work for.
Okay.
And this head of sales was, they'd gone through a downturn in like the 90s, like a company, whatever, it's all cyclical, man, like what's going on in every tech company right now.
Right.
And so this VP was told, hey, you got to cut your team. Kept going through rounds, cuts. Finally, they said, you're going to cut everybody on this Thursday. Everybody else done. And, he told me the story about how he fired the last person of a team that he'd built 50 people. They've been their lives. He watched each one of them just destroy themselves. And then the HR person looked at him at the very end and said, so here's your package. Now it's your turn. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your service. You've been here for da-da-da. And when it goes down, they don't give a fuck.
No, you're just a number.
Just a number.
Just a number.
They tell you all the things about the future and community and team and all those things. But at the end of the day, it's an actuary process. Mm-hmm. And just be eyes wide open. And I think what's going to happen and what I'm betting my business and my life on is that the pendulum's swinging back. Because this shit show right now of everybody trying to cut to try to act like we're not in a recession because we don't want to just say that money's not, it's ridiculous. Yeah. And because we're more interested in shareholder value, which is really centered on like the people that are on the inside, what ends up happening is like we're not only like isolating, driving loneliness, but we're removing the very fabric of community in our country.
Right.
Corporations actually served a very important part of community in our country. And I recently came across a gentleman, Randy Lyons, who we can add a link to his. He's got this depolarization project that he's doing, and he's committed to the research and the study. And the idea is this red-blue game going on in our country.
Right.
Work was supposed to be where we broke that down and stopped that shit because we had common goals.
Right.
Well, now nobody's talking. So actually, a lot of ways, like work is afraid to facilitate conversations in that space or to be something. It's just a really big change in the way it all works. And, I don't know where it's going to go, but I do know that the boomers are going to eventually move along.
Right.
And these Gen Zs that are coming along, That's a totally different group than the group that's leaving. I'll just say that.
Yeah, but okay, so on that point, and this is, I guess, a two-part thing, because like part of that, okay, baby boomers, they I'm not going to say they get a bad rap, but they have a reputation, right? Whether it's justified or not, I don't know enough about it to say. As a Gen Z, right, as this next generation that's coming forward, that's like, hey, no, we were half digital, half analog. We were latchkey kids. We get it. We understand. How many of these folks are going to be moving in that other direction of fear, of isolation, of, that other thing that basically that we're battling now with the baby boomers, right? So it's like, what are we looking for that we're not seeing, right? In this next generation, that's going to be the iron fist of like, no, you can't do that because that doesn't make sense, right?
It's already happened.
Exactly, right? So what do we, so it's
and
not.
You saw it in COVID and you saw it in the high schools, and I think it's the next thing that's going to really screw up our society.
So it's like, how do we look at that
and do something?
As something about it, right? And not only that, but looking at the idea of like, like toxic masculinity, toxic loneliness, all these things that we're doing now. What is that? What is the way that we're raising society now that we have to fix in the future?
Okay,
right?
So really interesting things, a lot of interesting points on there. What it has, a lot of times what we did research at Herman Miller around was native technology users. Okay. And so what was the prevalent technology? Like if I go back to my grandparents, right? Like my grandfather, Giuseppe, was an oxman.
Okay.
He didn't own a vehicle. He raised ox to plow fields in northern Italy. Mm-hmm. He didn't, I think, have a vehicle until he fought for World War II as a courier on a motorcycle. Like this context of their world and how small it was, that's my grandfather and my grandmother from a small village, on the other side. Mm-hmm. It's just, we unpackage it in the show and we try to talk about how this gets handed down. And you have to go back to that World War II generation because that's what informs the boomers.
Right.
See, it's not about the boomers going to Woodstock in my brain. It's about the generation previous and where they were. And by the way, that World War II generation, the greatest, they were survivors of massive trauma,
like all that
massive
shit, right?
amounts of trauma, like big trauma, right? Like my partner is Jewish, like Holocaust survivors type stuff.
Right.
Like holy cow.
Well, a lot of those generations were World War II, World War I, and World War II.
Exactly.
Right?
Like
so
I remember hearing a thing in World War I where they described like a young woman described how all of a sudden the men in the town disappeared, and that was it. After the fact, 20 years later, she realized that her entire that was experiential.
Right.
That's the programming. That's the somatic. And by the way, the great book that I just love and want to celebrate, some amazing humans turned me onto it, was My Grandmother's Hands.
Oh, it's a great book. Yes.
Because it catches that idea that somebody can survive the Holocaust, and 3 generations later, we can now be having still this like familiar family type programming around it. And we all have that stuff getting handed down to us. But what influences it is the time and space when we're there, the technology, the people, the interactions. And what we don't understand at all, and what's really scaring me right now as a person that's been in the tech world for a long time, is that it's psychological warfare.
Yeah.
It's like, it makes me think of psyops when I look at it, my cynical self looks at it. And then I'm like, well, are there adults in the room to protect us from doing that? Well, government's not there and corporations aren't motivated to do it.
Right.
Are the humans going to guardrail it? Well, no, because they're incentivized and they sign NDAs. So they make the money and then they find out too late, can't do anything. Like, it just doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
But when I get to the Zennials, the thing that I see is that like, well, my working hypothesis and working with a small group, and I'm going to go figure it out, but like we used PsyOps KPIs during their high school period. Were you allowed to make mistakes in high school, Adam?
I can honestly say that I don't remember high school much. I did a lot of drugs, drank a lot during classes. I don't remember high school a lot.
Yeah.
So I didn't even graduate on time. So,
which I'm glad you're hearing. It's your path, and I'm glad you overcame that.
Yeah.
And congratulations on sobriety, by the way. Seriously, I'm going to celebrate you, man. Yeah. That's no joke. That's there, and you walk the path.
Yeah, sobriety from alcohol.
Yes.
To be clear.
You said alcohol,
yes.
and I know that. Good point. my thing around that space is that COVID happened, and all of a sudden these humans that were supposed to be able to kind of make some mistakes in a safe place,
Right.
all of a sudden the fucking Gestapo showed up in the form of Microsoft Teams and Zoom. And I'm not like, I love those guys. I've worked with them. I'm not. It's not them. It's just how we apply the technology. A hammer's not bad. If I smack you in the knee with the hammer's bad. Like it probably took humans a few tries before like, oh, don't hit Adam in the head. All I'm saying is like, don't give KPIs to high school students, because here's what I'm seeing. You can't get them to commit to anything. There's a generation right now that's terrified of accountability. And where do I see it? It's hard to get people into meetings or to agree to meet at a certain time, or to lots of, the styles of communications, email versus text versus phone call. Yeah, all those dynamics. But all of that symptoms, where do we get back to? Where did it start? Yeah. I can look at folks that are older than that. I can look at like the early digital, right? That's how we define Zennials, is almost like when they have access, they're what we call native technology users. It means that the phone was in their hand, like my children. Probably not your children.
My youngest, yes, but my oldest, no. She just missed the cusp.
And we'll just use the first iPhone, by the way.
Right, yeah.
That is the transformative technology, okay? So what's the first generation that is synonymous with them? That kind of defines Zennials. But to me, this COVID group's different. Yeah. And I think that if we look at the way the boomers can communicate, well, how do the boomers communicate? Well, the boomers communicate in a post-World War II industrial complex way. Why? That's the shit show they were handed. Not their fault. Don't care. Like, nobody's problem. Right. Yeah, None of us is anybody's fault. We're all handed this stuff.
Doing the best you can with the situations you got.
But if we can't use the big boy words to talk about it and actually break it down and construct it on a whiteboard, we ain't going to change this shit. Right. And what I found is that growth becomes much more, well, I'm not going to say that actually. I don't think that's fair. I'm biased. I'm biased to believe that the younger you are, the easier it is to grow and change. And that when we form those healthy habits early in our life, that they become part of us and they're a superpower. And unfortunately, the boomers in my life have not demonstrated a willingness to change all the time. Right. Some have. And I tend to sometimes, we get into those bias moments, it's not, it's interesting though, how like a generational bias is coming up more than like racial bias.
Generational bias has been a big thing. There's actually on that, I want to share a story with you. There's a guy that I follow named Dr. Zach Bush. I don't know if you've heard of him at all.
It doesn't trigger anything, but I'm also not good at that game.
He's amazing. If you ever get a chance to listen to some of his stuff, he's on the podcast circuit. He does oncology, cell or soil regeneration, and like all this kind of stuff. He's a great guy.
Very cool.
But there's this talk that he has about the let's say current generations within the past maybe 20 years or so. We always hear they're not motivated, or they don't have any gumption or any drive, any blah 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 blah, right? Which I'm sure like tons of people said about us.
Who's been telling us that, by the way?
Yes,
the status quo boomers, because it's not their way.
Exactly,
that's the only difference. Totally. It's just like, wait, it's just different. Why do we?
To add context to this, right? To expand on the story. So this gentleman talks a lot about archetypes and about things like this, right? That. And so he's part of his background is he's what he calls himself a baby catcher, right? So he's he delivers babies and all this stuff. When he first started his career, when he was going through his residency, he was living in Africa, and so he wanted to go to Africa to help mothers birth, right? Because they need a lot of help down there. Yeah. And so this is observational hypothesis that he's come up with. I don't want anybody to think this is a paper that's been written and we're hanging our hats on this shit, but just adding context, right? So in Africa, in these impoverished areas, you have these mothers coming in that were malnourished in our standards and things like that, but still able to give natural vaginal births, and the babies would come out very, very healthy for the most part. There's a very small percentage that's even smaller than our child death rate, mortality rate in the States, right? So they were healthy babies coming out, right? Naturally birthed through the vagina, right? Now he comes back over to the States after a couple of years, and he starts working in Chicago. And he's seeing that a good half of the babies being birthed are C-sections. And the larger percentage of that half, let's say 27%, are elective C-sections. They're not medically needed, necessary. And again, I'm not making a judgment. This is just information coming in from him. So as a holistic person, he's like, okay, I'm gonna look at this as a story, right? And let's say your birth as a human being, right? So you're in your mother's womb. You're the most vulnerable you'll ever be, right? You have no understanding of what's going on. You're being fed through a tube in your stomach. You're not even using your orifices in your face as the way that you're going to use them, right? You're not you don't know what a light is, what sound is. You're hearing it all through umbilical fluid, right? Then all of a sudden, all that fluid drops away. You get turned upside down. Now you're traveling through a cave. All of a sudden, like, you're breathing through your nose, which you never did before. All this thing is chaotic, but you fight your way through this cave, and then all of a sudden you come out, and now there's bright light, and there's people, and there's beeping noises, and you get smacked on the ass, and that's your first story of success. You fought for your life, and you won. You made it through. So if 27% of those births didn't have a choice, didn't fight to make it through, why the fuck am I here in the first place? Whether you consciously or subconsciously believe that, it's like, no wonder there's this idea of lackluster. It's like, and it's, again, this is just information to throw in there, right?
It doesn't matter. Right? We're just talking. This doesn't need to be scientific. This is the whole point of authentic connections. Like, we're given permission to just say stupid shit to each other in the goal of finding truth.
Yeah.
It's called the Socratic method, you assholes.
Yes, asking good questions.
Exactly.
Right.
Stop beating each other up for having conversations. But this particular area, by the way, Adam, is a little bit harsher on that front than some of the other areas I've lived in this country. Yeah. And I think that's real. It's a little too much judgment sometimes. And it's like, whoa, can we not just think for a second and just press and be wrong and it's okay?
Right.
I have 2 children. I went into that process very, very eyes wide open, knowing we waited a long time. And I remember distinctly talking to my wife. We had a really healthy marriage. I was like, I don't know with what I've been through that I can be a father. I had this amazing man in my life, Fred Bargetzi, God bless him, he passed away. ALS. Fuck, you watch somebody get ripped away with that. Somebody that has everything and all they want is one more fucking hour of their life. And then you realize you're just throwing hours out the side of your window like a cigarette butt.
Wow.
What the fuck, man?
Yeah.
Like, get real on this stuff. But, one of the things that he was amazing. He was amazing because he just gave me so much courage. He's like, you're going to be great. Like, you're already talking about it. You're thinking about it. In fact, you're even considering this before you have a child means you're way above it.
Yeah.
And, I'll say we went into having children a lot later in life. And so why I bring that up is that I think that at that point, it's in some way a young person's game from an energy standpoint of the time. But I'm so glad because I had the mind to really try to be present and think about what was going on. What does this mean? The only thing I disagree with in your assessment is that the child in the womb is not actually living and processing everything. And I just think about the firstborn child and the nest, the pre-birth nest we created versus the second child and the pre-birth nest we created versus the third child and people that go through divorces and all of these things. And then I reflect on my own life and the fact that I don't ever remember my parents together. I don't have a single memory of a father and a mother together.
Yeah.
And that's, to that point, that's real. Yeah. That's real. If somebody's in utero and they're surviving a really horrific, abusive, tense, the fact they can carry their child is even amazing.
Right.
But it doesn't even have to be that intense. It might just be the fact that we're no longer playing the same classical music and having the same loving conversations because now we have a 2-year-old running around and there's chaos and we can't do those things.
Exactly.
But it does also bring us into the uniqueness of everybody. It's wild. I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah. I just, I love when people look at things differently and just, take it or leave it. It's just information, right? And like you said, this is, I was turned on to two terms recently, and I didn't do well in high school, as I mentioned earlier, so I didn't do debate or any of that, fun smart kid shit that I would consider that. But I've been turned on to 2 debate terms recently, and one is called steel manning, and one is called straw manning.
Okay.
Right. So steel manning is basically if we're having a conversation and you have point A and I have point B, and point A differs from point B in whatever way, and I'm sitting here expressing point B to you, but I don't really have a full understanding, and I start kind of falter over my words and maybe misspeak on some couple points and things like that. So steel manning is you on the other side being like, okay, I'm going to help you understand exactly what you're saying because I want to understand it so I can have the best understanding of how I need to respond. Because if you're not clear on what you're saying and then I just capitalize on one of those incomplete points, then we're probably arguing over nothing, right? So I'm gonna reflect it back in a non-dickish way, right?
No,
And
yeah,
that's so just to make
yeah.
sure we understand, right?
Yeah.
And so the other one is straw manning, and straw manning is that same scenario, but capitalizing on the foibles of the other person and be like, oh, you don't even know what you're talking about. Here we go. Now we go. Blah, 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 blah. And I think that is where
The latter
we're
feels like our society.
Exactly, right? We're not able to sit there and say, okay, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying because I don't want to disagree with you if I don't have to.
Yeah.
And if we're saying the same thing, but you just have a different way of saying it, and then but we can each other help get to that point, man, that's the betterment of our society right there.
So I think one of the things that I discovered a year and a half ago through my children in a really great book called The Whole Brain Child.
Okay.
There's this Dr. Siegel, I believe his name is, and it's called The Integrated Wheel of Awareness. And it captures back, because what I was thinking about earlier, when we were saying, how can I get out of this path? How can I be miserable but still find happiness? That's the first step. And the first step is to realize that we're capable of experiencing multiple emotions at the same damn time. So when somebody challenges me, and I'm not sure what they're saying, why can't I feel challenged and also feel inquisitive? Make up words like W over here. Like the ability to reach in and say, okay, like I'm going to use this as a sense of discovery. But we haven't been taught that at all. Right. And again, this is the behaviors of how our communications and our interactions are being shifted. And the thing about shifting, the thing about my life is that I don't know if it's my saying or somebody else's saying, but you can get a mile away from where you want to be 1 inch at a time.
Yeah.
And when you're journeying in life, and for me, what that felt like was 3-4 years in a really toxic work environment. And all of a sudden I woke up one day and I'm like, where the fuck am I?
Right.
A whole time I had nothing but positive intentions, greatness in mind, but all of a sudden we're over here. And that's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. And it's rooted, I think, in the way that we're communicating around this stuff, back to your point. Because if we can't go into conversations as trying to create a future together, an outcome together, a steel man, as you're saying, right? Mm-hmm. Scaffold the idea, build the idea.
Right.
Really great technique, by the way. I use this a lot. I'm a very argumentative person. You talked about it earlier as far as what you do for a living. You tell people, I run around all day long and I tell people stuff that I know that I'm not always practicing. It is very, very difficult for me. I am trying. It's also why I'm so excited about what I'm doing. Because I know that I have to hold accountable to my words because of the 4 agreements.
There you go.
So to account, now I have to reflect on myself when I can't. I need to do it in a healthy way. I need to be gentle. I need to give myself space, grace, time. It's not quick. Because if I beat myself up, I will go backwards. I will beat myself back to where I was, and I don't want to go backwards.
Right.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
So, coming from the adolescent trauma that you've experienced to the corporate trauma you've experienced to, we're, like you said, we're all living through capital T's, right? And in our own ways, but
yeah.
But, so through all that stuff and it sounds like, you're very open to talk about this, which is beautiful. A lot of people we hide inside of our traumas, but how are you alchemizing this in your own personal life? Not only for you, but you've talked about your wife, you've talked about your kids, you've talked about, thousands of relationships that you have in life, right? Whether they were created from this corporate jobs that you've had, through the yoga experiences, through life, whatever. So as you're traversing through this and understanding how this lands with you, how is that now being, how is that projecting through you into the life that you live with all these potential relationships that you do have?
Yeah. Well, I mean, some good, some bad.
Yeah.
In that sense. I would, the thing jumped to my mind, you said relationships at the last second, and that reframed in the terms of external, which is interesting. That's actually the battle I'm fighting.
Okay.
If you do Myers-Briggs on me, I'm 100% extrovert. And what people don't understand about that is that it means that I form my sense of self through others' reactions to me. That's a really shitty way to form a sense of self. All you introverts out there think I'm just a chatty Cathy. Meanwhile, you don't realize that if you chip away at me, if you look at me, if you scowl, if you don't smile, if you don't say thank you, if you don't, and Seattle's not the best spot for that, as it turns out. The old freeze.
Anybody that's from here, like, there's no Seattle freeze.
Yeah,
I'm like,
fuck yo freeze,
man.
by the way. Says
Holy
the Texan.
Christ, man.
Says the Texan, says the Iowan, says every other human. I just did a 20-state road trip. We no more get back to Washington. I look at Bree, I'm like, why is this campsite different than all the others? I'm walking around with a beer saying hi to people, and they keep frowning. Oh, fuck, we're back in Washington.
Exactly.
Welcome home.
Pee and baby. Birkenstocks and socks and frowns.
No offense, we love you all.
Exactly.
You're just a tough nut to crack. Well, but for me, that integrated wheel, that idea of being able to do both simultaneously, all that stuff. But here's what it will come to is so interestingly is that and this is the idea of the job. What do you do for a living?
Right.
How has it changed your relationships? Fuck my relationships. Start with B. Because the issue was I didn't have myself. Truthfully, like what I've come to discover and what I wrote down and the work we've done, and I've done energy work with Adam and others and all kinds of really great stuff, because I am a multimodal person. I'm a believer that, like, move consciously but move openly, and, like, there are paths.
Right.
But if you look at the abandonment, the molestation, the abuse at the hands of random people, the second abandonment, the mental and emotional abuse, the verbal abuse. Now we're in college. Oh, Nick gets an internship with General Motors, and they're like, dude, you're the smartest human being we've ever met. You're amazing at what you do. Right. You can interact and do this and that. Like, this is great. First time I'd ever heard that.
Wow.
First time I'd ever felt it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, now separating yourself and being able to look at that, that's all the coping mechanisms you've learned.
So work was a coping mechanism. Oh, we don't want to talk about that in this country,
man.
Especially in the male community. What do you do for a living? I work. We're not going to talk about real shit.
Yep. Wow.
Right?
And then, and then we idolize those folks that sleep 4 hours a day, that put their nose to the grindstone, that, have never had anybody help. That's one of the podcasts I listened to you and Jeff, the self-made man.
Oh, yeah.
Self-made human. I've done this all on my own. No, you haven't.
Bullshit.
No. Somebody let you sleep on the couch. Somebody gave you a 5-spot.
And I had amazing humans during all of that abuse that were just picking me up every day of the week, man. Right. They were there. They were amazing. Like, that's the people I want to celebrate.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the overcoming. That's the triumph. Yeah. That's the hero story. And part of what we need to do, and this is really important for those of you listening, you have to reframe the trauma into the hero story in a healthy way.
Yes.
In a healthy way. We don't embellish. We don't change it. It is an object fact that this thing happened and that it was horrible and that it reshaped me in a lot of negative ways. But I find you today able to talk about it because I am the hero in my story and my journey I own. I am not a fucking victim. I'm here out of purpose.
There you go.
And I know I swear too much for your listeners.
No. I fucking swear too.
Okay,
you're all good, man.
Have you heard David Goggins, that Hellcat Navy SEAL? Everybody's always like, he's controversial because, as soon as you say somebody's name, we're all going to try to go through everything they said and make a decision
like Jordan
about
Peterson,
me.
People like that. It's like, come on, man.
I just want to be able to reference the fact that when I listen to him talk, he says to the fasting, he's like, I know I fucking swear too much. He's like, but that's where I grew up. And if I'm not being honest to that, again, I'm not being true to the savage nature of like what's happened.
Right.
And again, those things in an integrated wheel of awareness can all exist at the same time.
100%. David Goggins is, I got one of my favorite mantras, I guess, now that I'm living by.
Yeah.
Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So he's a former Navy SEAL, right?
Yep.
And so I was, there was a book that he wrote, Extreme Ownership, maybe?
Yeah.
He might have been a reference.
I'm not
in that
good
book.
on the games. I'm not good on that game.
But no. So there was a book that I read by David Goggins, or he was part of, and but the theory that they talk about in the Navy SEALs is like say cleaning your gun, right? So you're swimming through the marsh, right, and then you get to the other side, and your gun's all soggy, so you got to clean your gun, right? But you're taking fire, right? So you practice cleaning your gun in a very calm way, as slow as you can, right? And your slow becomes smooth. Right. And then when you need to go fast, that smooth becomes your fast. Because if you ever tried to do something like, oh my God, my anxious and my anxiety is going, and I got to put this gun together, and you start dropping things, and yeah, exactly, right. You start like fumbling shit. That's not fast.
My car broke down on the way to a concert when my family had flown across the country with the sole purpose to go to that concert.
Oh shit.
And there I found myself in the parking lot of the Safeway in Leavenworth with a car that wouldn't start.
Okay. Yep. So when I set up my sound baths, I generally give in a perfect world, I get an hour and a half to set up. Let's say I have a sound bath tonight. 7
You are
o'clock.
so methodical and so beautiful in that way, and it is so the opposite of me. I show up everywhere, like coming in sideways.
Yeah.
Like I look like Kramer rolling in. I look like an Uncle Fester version of Kramer. For those of you at home,
Oh my God, I love
a sexy
that.
Uncle Fester version of Kramer. Okay, there, good, got it. Make sure my ego's still intact at the end of this. Poof.
But so like I'll roll into a sound bath, and I've got tons of bowls and gongs, and I got tons of
got
shit,
all the
breakable,
accoutrements,
everything, right?
Yeah.
And I can set it all up in about 15, 20 minutes, but I like to give myself an hour and a half because I got guests coming in, all this shit. So sometimes I'm driving to Renton, and all of a sudden traffic, 4 or 5 shut down, right? And my hour and a half turns into, by the time I get there, I got 15 minutes to set up before people start coming in. But because every time I set up, I have that mantra in my head: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Every time that I hit that brick wall where I'm like, fuck, I got to turn it on, I do, but I don't, right?
And this is the thing that like the special forces and the people that survive trauma, because what they're doing is simulating trauma in their somatic system and teaching their mind how to overcome it. The reason why that's so hard for us as humans is because there's a physical time delay. The best book is The Whole Brain Child. I shit you not, Adam. I read this book, and in the context of my little kids, all of a sudden I realized, like, oh my God, I am so screwed up. Like, it was like this big, but the way they write that book, sometimes observation of others is the best way to observe yourself, right? Because we've been talking about the idea of coaching people requires us to have a little bit of a mirror.
Right, yeah.
And so sometimes being in service to others, if we're really being in tune, intuitive, or all these things, it means that boy, oh boy, if we're not going to walk the path we talk about, that is, we'll see how that goes. Right. I don't want to try to do that for myself. I just don't believe in it. And it doesn't mean that I get it all right, and it doesn't mean that I screw it up daily.
Right.
But the path is the path. But what we're doing in that situation, and I had a little bit of military training, but nothing like that. Like I always joke, I served enough to really respect and appreciate what it means to go through that.
Right. Yeah.
But what I do a really good job of is when all hell breaks loose, I slow way the fuck down. And I simply say to myself, have you been here before? Yes. What'd you do last time? Do it again.
Yeah.
And there was a big transformation at my point, though, in my life where I used to really struggle with actualizing. And I can point to what happened 3 years ago in November. I almost lost everything. And I had to take every penny I owned and go hand build something to save my property. I had to hand build a 200-foot wall to fight back Lake Michigan. And I shit you not, man, I was getting cash out of the bank. I was putting I had to. And the entire time I was walking, dude, it was the most grueling work I've done in my life. And I've done a lot of hard physical labor. Not as much as many, but I've done my share.
Yeah.
I was carrying 2 by 12 by 16 foot pressure treated boards down 121 steps. 2 at a time. I need 4 tall. I need 200 feet long. Some mathematician can work that out. That's a lot of damn boards. And then I had to carry steel pipe down. And then, and the whole time I'm doing this work, and I'm the threat of losing everything, which Brene Brown, I'm a big Brene Brown disciple, daring greatly, daring greatly, daring greatly. If you're listening and you want a framework for the U.S. and the fuckery of shame, guilt, and everything we're talking about, that's the book. Don't listen to read to anything else in her stuff if you don't want to, but Daring Greatly is her source material.
Okay.
I've listened to it 3 times. It so beautifully captures the gap between men and women and corporate school shame, guilt.
Wow.
So, where was I? Damn it.
I always do that too.
Oh, it's the worst, right? You get so excited about topics that you want to move into. But where we were at is a space of cognitive performance, right? And this idea of being conscious of our space, being growth minded, and being able to break down these really, really stressful times. I think we have a really big, I don't like the word epidemic. I think loneliness is the one that we're trying to solve. We think loneliness is because there's multiple inlets to it, but I really don't like all this anxiety talk.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because anxiety is, I believe, rooted in this future state of failure or success. Oh, and when I was carrying those boards, the entire time my psychobabble was, they're all going to laugh at me. You fool.
Wow.
You fool.
Just right there, just
every single hour. I think I put 1,000 hours
Yeah.
of just the worst mental, physical anguish I've ever been through, and the house is still there.
Right.
You
Wow.
know, you know, your crew's been there before.
Yep, totally.
Right?
Totally.
Magical spot, worth saving. But the whole time, the narrative through my head wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't a sense of like, I'm going to do this. It was a sense of, you fool, you will fail.
Yeah. Wow.
I want to say that out loud because I had a man in my life that was like, get the fuck up and go. Go do something. Just get on the plane, get out here. How am I going to say, I won't, shut up and move.
Yeah.
And that's another concept that comes out a lot in that idea of basic training. And it's like you can't get paralyzed.
Yeah.
You train for these things so that you can react under stress, but you also have to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And you know what's rooted in all their training? There's this great article from back in the day. I don't know if it was Rolling Stones. They embedded with a special operations group with Navy SEALs.
Okay.
And the guy writes first person, what the first firefight. And I think he's in Afghanistan, maybe that or Iraq. Anyway, what's fascinating is one of the Navy SEALs, he says bullets are hitting everywhere. He's like literally losing his mind. And he'd been a combat person before, like just never been with that group. His Navy SEAL walked over to me as calm as could be, looked me in the eyes, took my pulse. And he goes, feel my pulse. Resting.
Wow.
They started measuring their heart rates. They don't get their heart rates up.
Huh.
Guess what? They make smarter decisions because they're never getting back in that somatic system. They're maintaining their logical side of the mind, the left brain, which I always associate left brain, I'm right-handed.
Right.
That's where I want to get to so that I can use my logic to solve the problem. My right brain, the emotional brain, there's a delay before you get there. But before the emotional brain, Nick, stop being so emotional. No, we're not using the right language. Nick, get out of your somatic system.
Right.
And that's what I've learned with you and with Marianne at the studio. And by the way, yoga, as defined by like Nicole LaPera in her book, How to Do the Work.
Great book.
Great book. If you recommend it to people, it is also an affront to a lot of conservative values, but the checklist and pragmatism of it, focus on that. At the end of each chapter, it is like, do this, do this. Love that. Because I can do something with it.
Yeah.
Action.
Yeah.
Right? But she talks about in that book, yoga is the perfect intersection of trauma. You know my toughest pose that I've had over the years? I haven't been able to touch my toes because I broke my back at one point in my life. That's just like physical. That's a mechanical issue. Right. That's more my ego gets abused in the room when I can't touch my toes, but I can do a headstand, that kind of shit.
Right, yeah.
No, it's triangle pose. No, not triangle. What's the one I get? Feet front, tuck my head, look at my belly button. Pyramid.
Yep.
I'm a pretty stable yoga person in the room. I mean, if I can do a lot of like balancing things. I can't do pyramid.
Okay.
Took me like year and a half, 2 years. Could never be in pyramid. It's not a hard pose for me. I don't have any physical constraints to say. I get tippy. I get angry. And I finally one day was in that moment, and I was thinking about the book from Nicole, and what she says in the book is that yoga is designed to stress out our somatic system, but our logical mind knows we're safe. So I went into this difficult pose. That's not a difficult pose. And I thought to myself, why the fuck can't I tuck my chin? Because that's the part where I start to come apart.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, I was 12 and I was being strangled by my 22-year-old stepbrother, and my mom walked into the room and saw it. And I remember her look. When you're being strangled by somebody and you think it's playful, you don't know what's going on.
Right, yeah.
That's the innocence of children. And all of that came back. God bless you, Nicole. Had you not written that down, I probably hadn't caught that.
Right.
Because I didn't have a framework for it. So again, let's not beat ourselves up. We're on the journey. We got to keep tracking. We got to keep testing frameworks. There is no right. Don't let people try to tell you what's right or not right. Now, I'm also saying somatic system, how to keep the score, or the body keeps the score, how to do the work. All of these books are rooted in the same psychodynamics, science-based approach. So I actually think this is a science type approach to this. I just don't know that the science is caught up to what's going on.
No.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's why every generation we learn new shit.
Yep.
And a lot of new areas, not just in weapons and things like that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something earlier that just plays perfectly into, the mindset that I love to think about, but the hero's journey.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And so I've had a gentleman on the show a couple times named Peter Boland, fantastic human being. He's a professor down in California. He does great mythology, archetypal work, stuff like that. He's a good dude. But I had him on the show a number of months ago, and we talked about the hero's journey, but we reframed it. And I want to just bring this up to you because of the journey that you've been on. So, when we hear Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey, a lot of times I like using the Lord of the Rings as a framework for it. A lot of people know Lord of the Rings. Like there's a Frodo kind of idea, right? That's the hero in the hero's journey and supporting casting characters, yada yada, right? So in that idea, it could be Harry Potter, it could be Luke Skywalker, whatever,
Buddha.
right? Totally, right? But so in that Lord of the Rings, so a lot of times when we think of the hero's journey, I think of myself as Frodo, right? And who's going to support me? Who's my Gandalf? Who's my Samwise? Who's my Gollum? I got to watch out for, right? Okay, cool. So who are you in somebody else's hero's journey? How are you showing up in somebody else, right? Are you somebody Samwise? Are you carrying somebody over razor sharp fucking rocks on your back just to make they can get their ring thrown in that fucking lava? Or are you Sauron? Are you pretending to be nice to them and all of a sudden you're stabbing in the back and then you take all their magic from them, right? Are you like, who are you, right? And I think it's interesting to see that, for me, it's been an interesting practice, like, especially with my kids, right? My kids, like, hey dad, we want to do this. And it's like, let's say this response comes out, right? Hey, Dad, we want to go.
Wait, you're not going to tell me that your dad responses are different than your responses in here with other humans, because then I would not be the only person. It's the worst, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I literally snapped at my poor kids last night in the truck because I was trying to sort through some adult shit. And then I just watched their little, like, and I'm like, I don't want that. Right. That wasn't, that's me.
Totally. And so, like, say
and that journey idea of being somebody else's journey, that is actually the discovery. And that's actually what tipped a lot of these things for me, where all of a sudden I was like, I could not look at it.
Yeah. Well, in that situation too, because we're gonna be triggered. We're gonna lean into some of our triggers. We're gonna fall victim to some of our triggers eventually, right? Especially the people that are around us the most.
Do you think you know what your triggers are?
Oh, hell no.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, I want to say that because it's implied.
Yeah.
It's always implied in these conversations, and I'm glad we paused right there. Because people listening from the outside, and we say these words like we confidently know what they are. I know what my capital T traumas are.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out the million little T triggers that happen throughout my day that relate to the combination of however many traumas I've had.
Right.
By the way, it's not a scorekeeping game with how many traumas we've had, but it does fucking matter. So if you're listening, don't be afraid to like take the ACEs assessment. Just see where you're on that spectrum. Because, we talk about trauma like my wife, Bree, geez, oh, Pete, you're not the first person I've talked to about this, Adam.
Right.
My wife is.
Yeah.
Wasn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And one of the things we came to the conclusion, she's been through trauma. We've all been through trauma. I hope people haven't. I don't want anybody to experience it.
Well, I don't think you can get away from non-trauma. Like,
I'm talking ACEs trauma, big T trauma versus little T trauma.
I think that was I know that there's a difference, but I think there's enough of an accumulation that we're dismissing the little T's, and that's becoming a capital T in its own right.
Amen.
Right?
And I also think we can talk about past traumas that we carry if we want to get real woo and abstract on it. Point being is, like, we were talking about traumas, and my score is a 9, and her score is different.
Right.
And when you look at the 9, and you look at how the body keeps the score. Yep. You've listened to it. You read it.
Yeah.
I couldn't finish it.
Okay.
Because we got to the spot where he starts talking about people with my number. I'm not supposed to be here. I don't want that. I don't need to listen anymore.
Yep.
I understand why I'm here.
Mm-hmm. That's
my reframe.
Yeah.
Right? Because I made a conscious decision to keep going.
Yeah.
And I had to approach that line, and it's just wild when you look at it.
Yeah.
And what it gave me permission for was that I'm different because I'm different and unique. I'm not asking anybody else to have it. I don't want anybody. It's not a measurement. Those things happened. They brought me to this spot. Clearly, it's afforded me all of life's blessings by a lot of standards, But also, I thought that my journey, I thought that everybody experiences trauma, and we do and we don't. I was having a similar conversation with a family member, and they looked at me and said, well, Nick, there's not a checkbox for being abducted by your dad and being taken away from your mom and ending up in a different state 3 weeks later.
Right.
And thank God the teacher asked, where's your mom at? And that's how they found it. Holy shit.
Right.
That is capital T trauma. You go back to those other generations we talked about in World War II and the stuff that my grandmother survived, the stuff my grandfathers.
Right.
You can't even process that kind of
No, it's
shit.
just like that was just a Tuesday for them.
And you're right. There are people that have never checked a box on that every day are suffering because they're in an environment that is not allowing them to be happy and healthy, and it comes in different forms. Like, everyone find a way to celebrate each other. And this is the thing that I love about the freak flag idea, is that it's not about sexual orientation. It's not about how I define myself. It's about whether I own my space in the world and I own who I am and my value and that contribution to others.
Yeah.
And that is really beautiful for me because I know that I can be off-putting to people's personalities. I know that not everybody's going to accept or want to be in this light. And I need to be okay with that as that extrovert because I spent a lot of time beating myself and trying to reconform to make others happy, and I'm sacrificing myself.
Yeah.
And sacrifice is really important. I think it's a great human attribute. I think it's what makes us brilliant as humans. I love to sacrifice myself for my family. It gives me a huge sense of pride. I also know that when I do it for too long, I am miserable inside.
Yep.
And I, all of a sudden, am not the person I need to be.
Right.
And it's, why I have my yoga stuff in the car with me, because I'm going to try to sneak in a session, because I haven't gotten one yet.
Yeah.
And if I don't get that session, then I can't be that best person. It's like it's a part of that whole process and methodology.
Yep. You got to know what's how to help yourself out of those situations when you get there.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about your GoFundMe that you started. So suicide awareness, male loneliness.
Yeah, so Authentic Connections, the project, is actually interesting. A year ago right now, Jeff Singer and I worked together at a big company, very, very toxic environment.
Yeah.
You can hear the backstory there, okay? A year ago, we were visiting each other. I was talking about how lonely I was because of the freeze.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was describing this. I'd moved my young family from New York City to the Seattle area after being a lifelong Midwesterner. And Seattle was a very, very difficult transition. And so anyway, we were talking about last year at the bar right now in New York. I had all my old buddies, all my old colleagues, which this is important for everybody to hear. We worked in an environment of trauma. Usually when you share trauma with people, it means that you can talk to them about it. Mm. And also I assume then we have a bond to talk about deeper shit. So Nick's drinking beers, ranting about loneliness as I do. And we get to the very end of the night, and Jeff, my now partner, comes over and gives me a hug, and he whispers in my ear, "Give me a call, I'm lonely too."
Oh,
I'm like, "What?"
Wow.
And I didn't say anything because I don't want to out anybody.
Yeah.
But what the fuck? This man, I perceived him as having it. He's sitting silently next to me. Mm-hmm. Physically next to me. Wow. And so we started talking.
Wow.
And once we started talking, he, to his credit, really was like, I want to do something with this. And he had cycles to give. And so he started defining and doing research. He's a brilliant writer. He's got a really nice, just a really great philosophical mind. And so what we started doing was, okay, let's role model it. We don't know how to do this. Let's just be clumsy. And so he picks a topic. He comes in, he says the topic, and I respond.
Yeah.
And, our first season touches on a lot of interesting things. There's one in there on modern masculinity that really touched somebody that we know at the studio as well.
Okay.
It defines a gentleman, Johnny, who was just here visiting. I just dropped him at the airport today. He was the guy that had to get to the King Giz show on Saturday, and the truck broke down, right? I had to make sure Johnny got there. Man, he flew across the country to go to the show. The pressure was on.
Yeah.
Talk about fumbling. 2 hours it took me to get the car repaired. Starter in a parking lot.
Oh, good for you. Wow.
Never done it.
Yeah.
I just got to work. And you know what Bree said when we got in the car? She's like, "Nick, holy shit, that only took 2 hours." I looked at her. I was like, that felt like 14 hours.
Right. Perspective.
So Johnny comes in and he talks about being a stay-at-home dad. I bawl every time I hear that episode because he says the word inadequacy. He said, I had to talk to my wife about being inadequate.
Right.
Because in Brene Brown's Shame Centers, the fear of losing everything for our family is one of our big guilts.
Yeah.
And so here he was. Now, think about being a stay-at-home father. How isolating that is. Can't pop into a Liche League meeting to get to know other moms. And by the way, that's what Bree did.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you breastfeed or not. Those are people in the same walk of life. Like, go find some people that can give you support when you're fighting through those early days, because that's what postpartum, that's that fourth trimester. So he unpackages that in modern masculinity. Man, I had a buddy from college reach out to me, super successful business person. He's like, I never thought about that. I never considered the perspective of a man having a successful career as a stay-at-home father.
Wow.
And then you think about the men that do that and how every other man comes up to him and asks, what do you do for a living?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. And how every other woman goes, what do you do for a living? And they go, oh.
Right.
And the women never trust you and the men never. It's just a really lonely place.
Yeah.
So the idea with the show is just to try to understand this concept of loneliness and the different paths, because we think the anxiety and the depression and the overworking and the over-religion and the over-sex and the over, well, that's all just coping mechanisms, right? And the symptoms, by the way, that we're seeing is that 80% of men in this country are committing suicide. So of suicides in America, 80% are men.
Wow. That's staggering.
In that episode on, can you be happy in a career? We talk about the idea of all these people that are walking amongst us in these corporate environments. And by the way, you want to be really crazy shit? It goes up with education and it goes up with income.
Yeah.
So all of us that think we're going to escape our misery through work, yet the numbers say we are going to kill ourselves at an increased rate. Suicide is not a high school problem.
Right.
We've been led to believe this. It's a lie.
Yeah.
It's actually a middle-aged male problem.
There's a quote. So I did a string of episodes a couple years back in September for Suicide Awareness Month, and a good friend of mine, Chris Pugh, came on. And he's actually downstairs right now. He's a clinical therapist downstairs.
Oh, cool.
He's a great guy. But he shared this quote that blew me away. And it's not his quote. He quoted from somewhere else. I don't remember where it came from. But the quote is, it's not that I want to die. I just don't know how to live anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man.
And it's so, because we find ourselves in these situations. My old boss used to use this term, promoted to your point of incompetence, right? And so, like, just think about that, right? So let's say you're a good bartender and you make now you're a good manager, and then manager, GM, you're a director of operations, now you're CEO. And all of a sudden you wake up and you're the CEO of a company and you're like, one, I don't know how the fuck I got here. I'm now realizing that I'm not qualified in my own right for whatever story I've got in my head. I don't think I should be here. Now I've abandoned all my friends and family to get to this point. I'm lonely as fuck. I don't have support. I don't even like my job. Who the fuck am I? What's that next step?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's those symptoms just keep piling up and piling up, but they're looked at from the outside as markers of success.
Oh,
yes.
Woo.
Man, before I started doing what I'm doing now, I was climbing every corporate ladder. I was getting the bonuses, the promotions, the attaboys, the KPIs, all that shit.
There were several middle-aged men in West Michigan in our community when we first moved there that it was, wait a second, what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And I knew the people that were in their circles. And I had my own walk with that.
Yeah.
And I was in those early days when it was like, it's more naivety in that point. You these responsibilities, burdens, these ideas, it's just, it's a lot.
Yeah.
The other thing I don't think we talk about, and the thing that we try to unpackage in this is like, fuck the suicide rate. Let's talk about the addiction rate.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the sex addiction rate, the work addiction rate, and one of the people that actually, if you do donate, the person that's doing the animation is this amazing man, Joel Mann. Joel Mann's his name.
Awesome.
Joel Mann. I always think of that movie. Murder and Axe Murder.
Oh, Mike Myers.
Yeah. Whoa, man. Joel, man. Now, I love Joel. He's an Orthodox Jew. I don't think he's ever seen that movie, by the way. But every time I say his name,
movie, man.
what I loved about it is we gave him the brief. He's just a brilliant animator. We gave him the brief. We let him listen to some of the shows, and he was the one that came back and even shared. He's like, here's this expression. It's a beautiful 30 seconds. And what it's designed to do is to really let people see themselves as being an outsider, as being different. And that it's okay that we don't have to find all of our sense of self in that group, but that we can find a sense of self through others, through community and loneliness, and the common, I think what loneliness for us feels like a term that's really neutral. It's okay to feel lonely sometimes if it's, sometimes.
Sometimes.
And it's okay to feel loneliness if we can also understand why we're feeling lonely as part of those integrated spokes of awareness.
Right.
But if we're lonely and we're out of control and we don't understand any of those concepts, then what do? Well, we cope.
Yeah.
And I would argue that there's a lot of slow suicide. And the person that I was thinking about earlier when I mentioned the stay-at-home father, like that person shared with me, it felt like it was a slow death through alcoholism.
Right. I honestly, I mean, if I hadn't stopped drinking, that's what I was doing.
You were trying
myself.
to kill yourself.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, I've done it for periods of time.
Yep.
I still drink. I'm very conscious of it. My mother was an alcoholic, never admitted it.
Mm-hmm.
But you find empty fists hiding around the house, and that doesn't seem normal.
Right.
Anybody's ever seen When a Man Loves a Woman? That Andy Garcia movie.
I don't think I've seen that.
It's great, by the way. It captures alcoholism without the happy ending.
Mm. There's a what's his name? Fucking hell. There's another movie that does that too. It's super sad. I think it's Matchstick Men. God. That doesn't matter. But,
I'm not good at that game anyway, so
Yeah,
I would just look at you and smile and nod, boys.
It's like, yeah, of course.
Smile and nod, like the penguins in Madagascar.
Nicolas Cage. That's what it was. Nicolas Cage.
I don't think I can watch Nicolas Cage. I think he's the worst actor in the history of actors. We're going to save that for another podcast.
I'm not going to disagree with you there. I'm not going to disagree.
I will tell you this on the Authentic Connections show. The toxic masculinity stuff. Again, we're trying to walk really weird lines in society right now because what we found was there's no voice. Most of the books written about men and stuff are by women. Most of the studies on this, it's because it makes sense. We all have a blind spot here. We've all talked about it. I don't want to revisit it. I just want to move forward.
Right.
That's all I want to do. And here's the thing that what I've loved, and we did basically we did the first season, sent it out, and just all the storytelling of people coming back and saying like, well, I've got a smile on my face, not because I'm happy about this, but because I'm right about this. Everyone is suffering in fucking silence.
Yeah.
So pick your goddamn head up, smile at people. If you see somebody on a bus and they look like they need a hug, go give them a fucking hug. You're not going to get cooties from them, guys. Mm-hmm. We've been programmed to believe this shit. And, I had the opportunity one time in life to save somebody, and it was intuition. It was the craziest thing I've ever experienced. I walked past that person. I knew who he was. I'd met him, I knew him, like he was a friend of a friend or in a group circle. Like I knew who that person was, and I bounced by that person and I gave him that common thing we all do. Hey, hi, what? Happy this. I try to say happy in the specific day just because it keeps me present in the day.
Yeah, yeah.
And it screws with people's programming. But I gave him that thing, and I was already basically up the stairs to my apartment in my room.
Right.
And I was ready to go to bed. That was the step. It was a late night. I was tired. And I just remember all of a sudden the image of him came back to me, and I was like, that's not him. That's a different person. And I went back downstairs, and at the time I smoked a cigarette, and this is where smoking was such a great thing because you could actually have a cigarette with somebody. Yeah. And we started unpackaging it. And, the thing about people that really get to that point is it's very rarely that day. It's usually a buildup.
Right.
And he'd been building up. And he checked himself into the hospital the next day.
Wow. Wow.
Yep. And you know what he's able to do? If I really unpackage the conversation, I haven't thought about it in a long time. I made him comfortable with talking to his fucking family about it.
Wow.
He was scared.
That's
he was
tough.
Scared shitless.
Yeah.
He was totally fucking isolated. He thought he was alone. He didn't think they'd understand. He thought that his family was going to judge him. It was all this stuff that I felt.
Yeah.
I felt that when I went for my walk.
Right. Wow.
And I made the decision that I wasn't going to give that power to anybody ever again. And, I did give that power to other people, and I keep fighting for it back, brother, because that's all you can do is take your journey.
There. Most definitely, man. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, that's why we're doing it.
Yeah.
And that's where if you have an opportunity, it's more important than to give money. Share the damn thing.
Yeah.
Even if we never produce the video, it just needs to land in somebody's hands. They just need to see it and go listen to an episode and be like, holy shit. Yeah. It's okay.
That's you made that point. I don't know if you made that while we hit record or before we hit record, but that's a really interesting point. And I can honestly say that looking back in hindsight, I'm victim of that too because I donated. To the cause.
Exactly.
I didn't share it.
Yeah.
And it's not because I can honestly say that it didn't occur to me.
No, of course not.
But after what you've said, I'm going to make a point to share it just from the point of, hey, not only did I donate to this, I struggle with this.
Yeah.
I think about this topic, loneliness, suicide, fucking way more than I think I should.
Yep. Once it touches you, it doesn't stop.
It doesn't, and so
I don't think about it. I don't think about it less. I think about it differently now.
Right.
This is the reframe
definitely.
again.
Yes.
Everyone, like, this is the beauty of it. And now I have this superpower that I've walked the line so that I was capable to save, to provide it again. And when we're in our intuitive self and our self of balance and presence, we can actually catch it.
Yeah.
And, I think one of the things that's a real marketing mechanism out there right now, everybody's going to be very conscious of, is that information is not spreading the way it should.
Right.
And the way the rules of social media have changed massively. So a share is more important than $1.
You talked about a call to action, talking about loneliness, talking about the podcast that you guys are putting out, the GoFundMe. So what are these next steps for you? And what do you think that, if people are feeling this loneliness in their lives, what are those steps that you feel that they can take, or maybe, an avenue that's worked for you that can be at least a jumping off point?
Double down.
Yeah.
Double down on the human interaction. Lean into all the things that you might feel is wrong, but what you're hearing is that intuition will start to guide it. It's so lonely when you get in that space. The way that I describe it on the show, my personal journey, watching others, watching my wife battle postpartum. Oh my God.
Wow.
For the women out there, we don't go through that shit. Our body just doesn't abandon us and change one day.
Right.
That's not something men go through, although we can't go through postpartum.
Yeah.
Anyway, different discussion. What I think the thing is like, you got to realize it's like a lawn screw. You twist yourself slowly into this space over time. And one day, you do have this awakening. And maybe this is the day. Maybe this conversation is like, you know what? Let's get some catalysts. Let's grab some of these books. Let's start to do some self-discovery. Awesome. Right? Once that process of understanding, you're not going to rip the lawn screw out of the lawn. If you put your husky, which is a runner of a dog, right, in the yard with the lawn screw, and they run around with that thing, you don't go over at the end of the barbecue and just rip it out of the grass, because you're going to pull your shoulder out. You're going to fail.
Yeah.
You don't pull the lawn screw out. You twist it out slowly. So take the steps, small. One of the things I love about getting in the yoga studio is it's time to reflect, to integrate our systems, to re-regulate, understand the science of what's going on in your body, your mind. Like, build up that space. But while you're doing that, just start to interact with more humans. What you'll find, and the beauty that you found, and the thing that bonds us together, is what we know that a lot of people don't know, is that if you simply start to take the journey and put it into the world will conspire to help you.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. And the like you've shared, the more we start to share our journey, and we find the trust in being able to share our journey, we realize how not lonely it can be, right? And not to say everybody's going through what you're going through, but when you realize that people are going through their own narratives, they're going through their own shit, like nobody's life is perfect, we all have our shit we're going through, whether it's financial, marital, spousal, whatever, weight issues, happen, whatever, right? We all got our shit. And I think when we can finally start to talk about it, and that's what's really helped me about this podcast. Oh, that's what I was talking about, the podcast. But that's when we can feel that, find that trust, it's like that's where we know that we're not alone anymore. Because I think down deep we know that it's not just us going through this, but it's so personal that sometimes we feel that we don't maybe have the right to talk about it. Like my life is going so good. Where am I to say this, or like, oh my God, like that person sleeping in a cardboard box. Why am I upset about not getting my bonus?
Nobody wanted to hear about Nic Milani as a vice president of a company getting abused by a narcissistic asshole of a CEO.
Right.
But I'll tell you what, it had a big impact on my life.
Yeah.
And I was really lonely.
Yeah.
And it sucked. And I don't want anybody to feel that way. And so let's be kind to each other and accept. And by the way, when you see that middle-aged executive white person, you're probably getting triggered from a past abuse from some other human. Right. I have the same problem.
Right.
If you haven't understood my path through this conversation, those same men abused me. So I don't trust men. I trust women. Right. We've talked about this in some of the privacy of our energy sessions. Mm-hmm. Like to have Adam, and if you ever have a chance to have Adam do energy work or his sound work, it's just incredible. Sound baths are like a massage for your brain. I told you I was going to brag about yourself. Sound bath is like a massage for your brain. It harmonizes. It feels so great. And the energy work is just amazing. It's really beautiful. But for me, it was really scary to have a male touch my energy. It wasn't scary to have a woman touch my energy because women have always been good shepherds and guides to myself. Men have been the source of abuse. And what I started to realize is like one of my triggers is what I perceive to be spoiled rich kids. Nick has a chip, especially. It's not females, it's men.
Okay.
Because those are the kids that I always looked at in high school and thought, truth is, like, a lot of those spoiled rich kids were having the shit kicked out of them at the same time.
Right, exactly.
And you know what? Money abuses. And now that I know what those money circles look like, hell no.
Yeah.
Hell no.
Yep.
So let's all be graceful to each other. Let's all remember we're human. You know, that's
right.
the call to action.
Oh yeah, right on. Well, where can people go to check out the podcast, to find out more about, you know, the GoFundMe, things that you're working on?
So it's on GoFundMe for suicide awareness. The podcast is called Authentic Connections with an S on the end, plural. And the website is AuthenticConnections.online.
Okay.
So we should be on all the different podcast services. And again, just think about sharing it more than you normally would.
Yeah.
Think about sharing it with people that are in circles with people. Just try to trust that it'll find its way, because I'll leave it with one thing. I sent it to a bunch of random humans, and I sent it to this one gentleman. Anybody that I'd ever talked to in my life that was a male that I had a real conversation, I was like, send it. Let's see what we get for responses. Right? Because I wanted to hear from them if they thought like out of bounds, no, you're not, like, or they don't respond at all. And this one guy responds back and he says, hey man, I love that. I don't understand any of it. Didn't grow up in that at all.
Okay.
But I recently had a 17-year-old new employee in my company come to me and confide in me that he's having real issues at home, and I don't know how to talk to him. So I'm going to share a podcast with him.
There you go. There you go. God damn it. That's beautiful.
Dude, that's all that needs to happen.
That's exactly
one
it.
fucking human. All that work's worthwhile.
Yep.
That's it.
Man.
So I feel bolstered that if we share it, there's lots of humans that can touch it.
Yeah.
But fuck, it's not about money.
Yep.
It's just about awareness, about making this okay. And we're all going to benefit as a society if we can all start talking in real words and frameworks and not judgment and not, you don't believe in this, that means you're this. Release it. It doesn't serve us.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Nick, thank you so much for what you do, man, and your vulnerability and sharing your journey. I love our conversations, love you as a human being. I love the journey that you're on, and that I can be adjacent to it and watch and be inspired by you.
I think you're helping to guide it, so it's a little bit bigger than that, but thank you.
Oh, I appreciate you, brother. I look forward to having you back. Thank you so much for spending time with Nick and I. Please check out the show notes for ways that you can get in touch with Nick, support the causes that he has, or to contact us in any kind of way. Also, ways you can support the show. Obeisance and love. We'll see you next time.